Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we're recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.
Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Dave Michalczyk, the Chief Technology Officer for the Defense Information Systems Agency, Armando Gavino, the Executive Director of the Office of Network Services within the Office of Integrated Technology Services in GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, Sean McIntyre, a Solutions Architect at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the Department of Commerce, and Tim Solms, the Vice President of Federal for Juniper Networks. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Before we get started, let me set some context for our discussion. Federal networks seem to be in a perpetual state of disruption over the last 20 years. First, agencies moved from mainframe to client-server setup. As soon as agencies seem to have gotten the client-server approach down, in comes managed services, and that kind of morphed into cloud computing or the as-a-service approach to running networks. Now, as some called, we're in the third phase, software-defined networking. Others say it's part of the cloud evolution, where the software running the network is really in charge and not the hardware. No matter what term you use, we know this software-defined network approach has the potential to lower costs, better security, and more efficiency. Of course, for many of us, we've heard that before. It feels like those are the same promises of all the other technologies. So what makes this time different? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. First, the understanding of the power of software is much different today than in the past. It allows for the integration of previously separate architectures and hardware devices. SDN also can let agencies better plan for growth and changes to the network, and can allow agencies to take more advantage of network automation and maintenance. All of these reasons are part of the growing realization of software-defined networking. A recent research by IDC, a market research firm, says software-defined networking is a growing market. It estimates spending on SDN will grow worldwide to about $12.5 billion by 2020. IDC says SDN delivers the agility, flexibility, and programmability that align well with public and private sector cloud rollouts. IDC also says this software-focused approach to networking also provides a more collaborative approach to IT and more business-oriented understanding of how the network enables application delivery. In fact, a 2015 survey by Juniper and General Dynamics IT supports IDC's research within the federal government, saying more than 70% of the federal respondents are planning to or already are using software-defined networking. So with that context in place, let's turn back to our panel, find out why software-defined networking in the federal space is a growing market. Once again, my guests are Dave Michalczyk, the Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Information Systems Agency, Armando Gavino, the Executive Director of the Office of Network Services within the Office of Integrated Technology Services in GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, Sean McIntyre, a Solutions Architect at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the Department of Commerce, and Tim Solms, the Vice President Federal for Juniper Networks. So let me turn to Dave, since I think DoD is probably furthest ahead of when it comes to software-defined networking. But let's just talk about network today and how is it changing. Let's not get wrapped up in the term SDN. Talk about the network changes that are happening.
Bottom line is SDN is not an end, it's a means. And it's about giving us more agility, more velocity in terms of making changes to the network and adapting to customer requests and reducing costs. So if we view it from that lens, I think we'll see it's a natural evolution of what we've been doing previously. So in particular, by linking software-defined networking with our cloud computing strategy, we can much more rapidly provision secure virtual data centers for customers inside the DoD network and configure and reconfigure those on demand, potentially in near real time. And once we get there, we'll be able to derive significant benefits in terms of cybersecurity. So imagine a data center coming under attack and being able to literally move that data center from one physical location to another location in real time. How about being able to modulate the addresses associated with the applications, or even change the underlying operating systems to remove a vulnerability associated with a particular piece of code? And all that's possible with SDN.
So the one follow-up I have to ask is, you use the term data centers, and I don't want to nitpick on the term data centers, but there's this big move, obviously, to reduce data centers. When you say data centers, are you talking about just instances of cloud or instances of what?
Well, I use the term virtual data center, and by that, that could be hosted in a traditional DoD physical location. It could be in a commercial off-premise data center. It could be in a community cloud hosted in one of many different providers, and that's our goal. We want to get to the point where it really doesn't matter where the data resides, where the applications reside. We want to be able to configure and reconfigure that on demand, and that's part of our strategy.
Interesting. Let me turn to Sean over at NOAA real quick. You guys also are basically ahead of maybe a lot of other agencies in the civilian world when it comes to this use of this type of technology. Talk about what the status of your network today and where do you see it going?
Well, first of all, I'd like to agree with what Dave said and state that SDN is a platform upon which applications will run and take advantage of the underlying control. And I think that there's probably, in my opinion, a dearth of applications out there right now, and that may be one of the reasons why there's a slowness to adopt. NOAA's networks are not, it's not really a network, it's a loose affiliation of a number of networks. We're working towards consolidation. We've studied and assessed what our problems are or challenges are accomplishing that, and we've got plans to do it, and we're working on that now.
And this idea of software-defined networking, or again, software at the really have the software control the network, is that part of that planning as you kind of look out in the future?
It is, but on very specific niches.
Just because that's what works best in those areas,
well,
or is
I think
full-fledged?
I think that doing it end to end is a big leap, and I think that there's a lot of questions about how do we do what we're doing today using SDN, and the roadmap between today to full-blown SDN implementation is not that clear.
I know Tim's probably shaking his head, but I'm not going to make him wait. I'm going to turn to Mondo real quick, because GSA is developing the new follow-on contract to networks. SDN is probably a big part of it. Where do you see SDN fitting in as you kind of are shaping the Enterprise Information Services contract and infrastructure services?
I believe it truly fits the construct of what we're trying to do. First of all, one of the mission set that GSA do is basically save government money. SDN basically offers that ability to do that. Basically, by centralizing some of your controls, it should lessen your capital expenditure, your CapEx and your OpEx, thereby transferring some of that funding into your cybersecurity functionalities, requirements into the future. This is actually part of the I think it was in section C of our RFP. We basically mentioned that this is the way of the future. We would like to see this capability. And also it manages the data sets that we have in our networks with an X program, where we see a tremendous drop going from old technology, which is TDM, ATM-based systems, into more of an IP-type systems. It fits perfectly into the mold of the future. SDN is the future, and I'm proud to say that SDN and the GSA is, I believe, is one of the agencies leading the way in promulgating this through our EIS contract.
And I know, talking with Mary Davey, who runs the Office of Integrated Technology Services, the networks, again, with the X contract from that you guys are looking to do a follow-on for, that's all growth in some areas, including the IP-based infrastructure, and she was a little surprised by it. Is that, when you look at why people are going there, is this part of this whole evolution of cloud, of SDN? Is that why there's this growth?
I believe it's a natural evolution. Centrally controlling all of your management assets, it's the way to do it. Again, it's all about managing your network. Again, IP-based, part of the offering for EIS. I think this provides an opportunity for standardization. As you know, our job is to provide contracting services. Part of our job is to provide contracting services for federal agencies. There's about 160 agencies that use these networks contracts right now. And oh, by the way, there are 84 plus LSAs, local server support agreements, throughout the regions that we will be taking over here in the very near future, because we just, our organization just realigned recently. So we will have the responsibility there as well. So there's an opportunity to standardize our acquisition approaches and buying habits to the advantages of the government. Again, it's all about saving money. I think we are in the forefront of leading that type of work.
Armando could take us down a whole path of category management, but we won't step into that rabbit hole and turn to Tim from Juniper. What you're hearing from our government guests is interesting. There's a move for it, but again, means to the end, it's a big leap. Give me your thoughts of what you heard and what you're seeing from your clients.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jason, you started out saying that networks have basically gone through 20 years of disruption, and I'm going to disagree with you on that. I think networks have gone through 20 years of evolution and 20 years of transformation. I think it is the one part of the IT stack that remains to be disrupted. When you look at, in the last 10 years, how we've changed mobility, compute, applications, data centers, on the core IT services, I would tell you that all of those, with the exception of networks, have gone through disruption. Software-defined networking is an evolutionary process, but it's evolutionary, not revolutionary. What we're doing is we're looking to say, okay, the fiscal constraints that we're now experiencing inside the federal government are pushing us to make cost-efficient yet secure decisions. And as the threat continues to evolve and working collaboratively with the federal government, what we're doing is we're finding ways to better present ourselves to that threat. Dave brought up, that we are in an environment now where we're able to not only respond to a threat, but to use, the big data and machine learning that comes along with that so that we can predictively prepare for that. Go back to, I'll look at FM radio traffic. It's something, near and dear to the heart of.
Excuse me, we're Federal News Radio, we only do AM here.
That's great. So I'm talking about Department of Defense. So Department of Defense, back in the 70s, we said, okay, we've got a real problem with people, tapping into our FM radio. We're gonna encrypt it. So we encrypted it. The next thing was, okay, even when it's encrypted, it can be attacked, it can be jammed. So we went to frequency hopping. It's very much sort of that same idea. Static networks and networks that are sort of defense in depth are no longer really meeting the evolving threat. And so what we're doing is we're putting in a position where via software we can manage that, we can respond, we can predict, we can react, and better protect those networks and be able to shift, on demand or even predictively shift and protect data. And ultimately, what I think we're going to see is that the network is going to continue to fade into the background. The network is going to be very much like the U.S. highway system that, building it, huge endeavor. Now we're looking at how capable is it, how, what's the throughput, how survivable, how does it meet the needs, and that, again, big data, machine learning, applications, core compute, really mission-oriented activities are going to come to the forefront as the network continues to move further back from visibility.
Dave, let me turn to you, because what Tim said was interesting about network, kind of further going to the background. DoD over the years has spent a lot of money, a lot of contracts, a lot of effort on their network. I remember the gig, I remember the network-defined, many different initiatives. Do you see that happening within DoD, that of moving toward the background, or is it always going to be at a certain point?
So we're going to continue to need secure network connectivity between our major locations. We're going to continue to need that at unclassified and classified levels. That's what our network backbone provides us. What we don't need, though, are complex, manually driven configurations of that wide area network, as well as complex, manually driven configurations of our local area networks within the customer enclave, the post-campus station, or within DoD data centers. And that's what SDN is going to help us with. It's going to remove that cumbersome manual configuration, instead make the entire network programmable. First inside the data center, very likely then at the customer edge through something called network function virtualization, and then over time even in the wide area network. Although the exact technologies that we're going to choose to deploy in those locations are still a subject of research and acquisition.
Sean, as NOAA is looking at the updates to their network, do you see the same thing, meaning take out the complexity and really driving towards the automation versus the manual?
Absolutely. NOAA's mission is more about getting information out. And every discussion that NOAA has about architecture begins with security, but it's also recognized that we need to be able to get information out quickly and under very, very varying conditions conditions. For instance, if there's a severe weather event impacting the East Coast, there's a regional demand for information, a spike in regional demand for information that can impact that region. So as we talk about how to deal with those sorts of things, we're looking towards technologies that would allow us to reconfigure our network, not manually, but very quickly, to utilize other regional ingress-egress points to be able to offload some of that load. So doing that automatically would enable us to do it quickly, but traditional technologies would take days very often to be able to do that.
Imagine from a NOAA's perspective, as you guys were planning, knowing that, okay, if there's a big storm hitting the East Coast, you'd see a lot of people coming to your website. Would you plan days out for that upgrade, or how do you handle it now versus how maybe you would handle it if you would move to software-defined networking or something similar?
We certainly look forward, but very often we don't have that amount of time or that luxury to be able to reconfigure the network like that. Software-defined networking, cloud technologies, being able to spin up additional compute in a very short term, those sorts of technologies will aid us. Right now, what NOAA's engineers do is build in up front overcapacity to deal with those things, and so it's the ability to not do that or not take that approach that we're looking forward to.
So Sean, that's exactly what we've seen as well. The problem is that overcapacity is cost and it's complexity. Exactly. And when something unanticipated happens, like say you lose a physical location or you need capacity that wasn't anticipated, there's a huge amount of delay that appears in the system. And yeah, we can work well in contingencies. We can have people surge and focus on a particular problem, but we don't want to continue to operate in that mode. We want it to be automated, and we want to be able to scale out our compute across not only DoD data centers, but commercial cloud providers as well.
Tim, real quick.
And I think very interesting. So, all three of these gentlemen, federal responsible for networks, everyone's talking about security, they're talking about mission, they're talking about information to the operator in the field. And I think that is the consistent shift that we've seen really across the federal government. So you're right, you do have to be able to flex and scale, and leveraging the federal government's investment in cloud technology across the full cloud continuum, this then provides that network capability to take full advantage of that. You're right, we still see rooms full of very experienced people who have been running networks for a very long time, where those efficiencies have been found in other parts of the IT compute piece. The question now is, how from a software perspective can we become more nimble, more effective in those exact scenarios that we're discussing?
All right, I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to turn to Armando to start to talk about this overcapacity issue and how you guys, from a contracting networks perspective, are dealing with it. But we have to take a break. You're listening to the panel discussion, Trends in Network Modernization and Security, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.